Dr. Yassemin has applied to have her name restored to the medical register after being removed for disciplinary reasons in 2015. The tribunal has considered her application in accordance with the Medical Act 1983 and the GMC Fitness to Practice Rules 2004. This is Dr. Yassemin's first application for restoration after erasure. Dr. Yassemin qualified as an MBCHB from the University of Edinburgh in 2008 and worked as a Foundation Year 2 trainee at Oxford University Hospitals NHS Trust and Buckinghamshire Healthcare NHS Trust in 2011 and 2012. Her erasure from the medical register was the result of events that were first considered by a fitness to practice panel in 2015, which also reviewed findings from a previous fitness to practice panel in 2011 regarding similar matters involving dishonesty. Both determinations were provided to the current tribunal considering Dr. Yassemin's application for restoration. The 2011 panel reviewed the case of Dr. Yassemin, who had performance and conduct issues during her second, third, and fourth rotations as a junior doctor. Her educational supervisor was concerned about her performance, and she failed her third and fourth rotations due to her absences, record keeping, communication with colleagues, prescribing errors, failure to organize tests, and inadequate interpretation of ECGs. The panel found that Dr. Yassemin deliberately changed the marks awarded by her colleagues and lied to protect her reputation, and her repeated dishonesty and unprofessional behavior amounted to serious misconduct. The panel determined that Dr. Yassemin's fitness to practice was impaired and imposed a 3-month suspension on her registration as a doctor, considering the seriousness of her behavior and the need to maintain probity in the profession. The panel expected Dr. Yassemin to use the time to reflect on her actions and the need for honesty in her professional life. The 2015 panel heard evidence regarding allegations against Dr. Yassemin when she was a Foundation Year 2 trainee between August 2011 and July 2012 in Oxfordshire and Buckinghamshire. The panel heard evidence from 13 witnesses called by the GMC, and Dr. Yassemin herself gave evidence and submitted written evidence. The 2015 panel concluded that all the witnesses for the GMC gave clear, straightforward, and credible evidence. In contrast, the panel considered that Dr. Yassemin was vague and evasive in her answers and that many of her answers were untrue, and therefore her evidence was less credible and less reliable than that of the GMC's witnesses. The panel found that 53 of the charges were proved, 9 of which involved dishonesty. The charges involved Dr. Yassemin arriving late for ward rounds, leaving ward rounds without informing colleagues, failing to take responsibility for the care of patients, taking an unnecessarily prolonged time to complete tasks, failing to attend multidisciplinary team clinics, completing TTO and discharge summaries with incomplete information, failing to carry out effective handovers, failing to communicate correct information to team members, failing to carry out investigations in a timely and safe way, failing to engage with colleagues when asked questions relating to the care of patients, ignoring colleagues, admitting a patient in her absence as not a blue bloater or pink puffer, speaking to a colleague in an angry manner, falsely stating that she had handed over a patient to a colleague when she did not do so, falsely informing a colleague that another colleague had taken responsibility for an incident involving the death of a patient, confronting a colleague in an angry manner about allegations that she had not answered her bleep, and angrily confronting and shouting at a staff nurse in the presence of a colleague. Dr. Yassemin was found to have been dishonest and lacking in personal responsibility by the panel in 2015. It was found that she did not inform her employer of her previous difficulties and was found to lack insight into the potential consequences of her lack of probity. As a result, her fitness to practice was found to be impaired, and erasure from the medical register was deemed appropriate due to her persistent lack of integrity and unwillingness or inability to remedy her conduct. Dr. Yassemin appealed the findings, but the High Court upheld the decision of the MPT. The tribunal has considered all the evidence, including oral and documentary evidence. Dr. Yassemin provided reflective statements and gave oral evidence, and the tribunal received evidence from a witness on her behalf. The documentary evidence included the determinations of the 2011 and 2015 panels, the High Court judgment and appeal order on Dr. Yassemin's appeal of the 2015 panel's findings, Dr. Yassemin's restoration application form, updated CV and CPD details, development and restoration plan, return to work plan, and testimonials provided on her behalf. The GMC opposed Dr. Yassemin's application for restoration, citing serious and repeated misconduct over a number of years at multiple locations, including findings of dishonesty. The GMC argued that Dr. Yassemin has not fully accepted her dishonesty and demonstrates a lack of genuine insight, including evidence of minimization and confusion about the definition of dishonesty. The GMC also questioned the effectiveness of Dr. Yassemin's learning and remediation efforts, and urges caution in allowing her to return to the medical register at this time. The counsel for Dr. Yassemin submitted written and oral arguments to the tribunal in favor of restoring Dr. Yassemin's name to the medical register. He argued that Dr. Yassemin has demonstrated her current fitness to practice, is committed to the profession and to NHS patients, and that restoration would meet the overarching objective of serving the public interest by retaining an otherwise excellent doctor. He also noted that the MPTS guidance on restoration does not include erasure for dishonesty and that restoration is possible in theory in any case. He further argued that Dr. Yassemin has true insight into the findings of dishonesty, the need to act honestly and maintain trust, and that insight should not be equated with a current admission of dishonesty. He emphasized that Dr. Yassemin has demonstrated genuine insight into all of the matters set out in the guidance, reflected extensively on her character and the specific allegations in this case, and has appropriately apologized. He also pointed out that Dr. Yassemin has undertaken an enormous amount of CPD in this case, beyond what any MPT could expect, which is relevant to her general skills as a doctor and has mitigated any diskilling while targeting the issues of concern including communication and probity.
The tribunal acknowledged that the power to restore a practitioner to the register is discretionary and should be exercised in accordance with the statutory objective of protecting the public. The tribunal relied on the MPTS guidance on restoration when considering Dr. Yassemin's case and noted that the onus is on her to satisfy the tribunal that she is fit to return to unrestricted practice. The guidance sets out a test that the tribunal must apply when considering restoration, which involves assessing the circumstances that led to erasure, the extent of remediation and insight, and whether the doctor is now fit to practice in accordance with the overarching objective. The tribunal also considered 5 factors set out in the guidance when making its decision, including the circumstances leading to erasure, the doctor's insight and responsibility, what they have done since erasure, their skills and knowledge, and the lapse of time since erasure. Ultimately, the tribunal must determine whether restoration would meet the overarching objective of protecting the public. The MPT first focused on whether she has demonstrated insight into the matters that led to her erasure, taken responsibility for her actions, and address the findings about her behavior or skills. It is acknowledged that the legal test for dishonesty has changed since her erasure, but it is agreed that the previous panel would still have found dishonesty proved based on current legal principles. The current level of insight is what needs to be considered, and a denial of misconduct or dishonesty does not necessarily equate to a lack of insight. Ultimately, the case is about whether Dr. Yassemin is currently fit to practice and have her name restored to the register, rather than whether she has demonstrated insight into her previous failings and the findings of the previous panel. Despite attending courses on probity, the tribunal found that Dr. Yassemin had not developed insight into her dishonest behavior and could not identify it as such. The tribunal concluded that Dr. Yassemin's flawed thinking on these matters undermines her reflections and indicates that she may behave dishonestly again in the future. The tribunal found that Dr. Yassemin did not meet the requirements of B10 of the guidance, as she had not understood or accepted what went wrong and had not developed sufficient insight despite attending multiple courses. The tribunal partially found that remediation had been undertaken, but Dr. Yassemin had not learned the appropriate lessons in terms of her dishonesty.
The tribunal considered the likelihood of Dr. Yassemin repeating her past misconduct when assessing her application for restoration to the medical register. The tribunal looked at her insight and the steps she has taken to remediate, including completing courses and providing reflective statements. While Dr. Yassemin has taken steps to remediate, the tribunal found her continuing lack of insight to be concerning. The MPT noted that while she has improved her communication and teamwork skills, her past cases of dishonesty cannot be remediated in this way. The tribunal emphasized that a low but real risk of repetition, particularly if it could result in serious outcomes, must be carefully distinguished from identifying no risk of repetition. The findings suggest that the doctor has taken steps to remediate her skills and keep her medical knowledge up to date, and her dishonest misconduct remains remediable. However, her lack of insight into her failings, especially the dishonesty aspects, remains a significant concern. The lapse of time since erasure was not considered a relevant factor. The doctor's limited insight and the risk of repetition pose a threat to colleagues and patients, and she cannot be trusted. The tribunal had grave doubts about restoring her to the register at this time, given the evidence of the risk of repetition. The doctor's lack of insight, failure to remediate her failings, and the risk of repetition can put patient safety at risk and bring the profession into disrepute, which undermines all three limbs of the overarching objective. Therefore, restoration would not meet the overarching objective. Having carefully considered the evidence and specific circumstances of this case, the tribunal was not satisfied that Dr. Yassemin is fit to return to unrestricted practice at this time. Accordingly, the tribunal refused Dr. Yassemin's application to be restored to the medical register on this occasion.